We are recording. So this is the first time I'm hosting a conversation like this. Uh, it's pretty exciting to be here and dive into a new format for discussing what I think are really important topics that we should all be paying more attention to. Joining me today are Bill and Caleb from Northwest Alpine. How's it going, guys?
Good. Thanks for having us.
It's a nice kind of fall spring Monday here in Oregon today.
Very cool. For those who aren't familiar with Northwest Alpine or either of you, I'd love if you could give kind of a brief introduction of who you are and what Northwest Alpine is and what you guys do.
Yeah, so Northwest Alpine's a technical apparel brand. I started in 2010, so this is going into our 16th year.
15.
Well, no, 15, and then this is the start of 16.
Now in 16, right?
Yeah, crazy. So I started the brand kind of with the intention of making technical apparel that's pretty climbing focused. That's kind of my background, and one of our core kind of values, what we always wanted to do is make things in the U.S. So that kind of journey started in 2010 and has we've kind of gone through a bunch of different phases, including in 2014, I started another company called Kachatna Apparel Manufacturing, where we did manufacturing for our own brand and then contract manufacturing for other companies as well. And kind of that was my focus for 9 years while that company was running, was mostly on contract manufacturing side. The brand still existed, but was smaller part of what we did. And then I ended up shutting the factory down at the end of 2022. And so we're kind of the last couple of years in this kind of revival of the brand. And this is really the first time since 2014 that I've been able to focus all my attention on making our own product and all that entails.
Amazing. You mentioned at the beginning that you were an outdoor athlete. How did that kind of play as a catalyst for launching a technical apparel company with that specific focus?
Yeah, I mean, that was everything, right? Like I was doing a lot of alpine climbing, ski mountaineering, that sort of stuff, and was just really around that time kind of unhappy with a lot of the technical offerings that were available, just because, a lot of the brands with the climbing heritage kind of transitioned to more lifestyle focused apparel, because that's, market is obviously much, much bigger than alpine climbing is. So, not being happy with what was available. And, I think that's, there's a lot of founder stories like that. You're passionate about something and you realize that there may be a hole in the market and want to see if you can address that. And so we had like the climbing side, and then obviously the manufacturing side is nobody was making, very few people are making technical apparel in the US. So, I thought, how hard could that be? And it turns out it's pretty hard, actually. So,
yeah, when you look at founding stories for brands, particularly in the outdoor industry, that's a pretty common trend. They went out and these athletes realized that there wasn't equipment or apparel suitable for the endeavors that they were pushing into, especially as alpinism and ski mountaineering are very demanding on people and psyche and gear. And so I think some different brands come to mind, like Montbell. The founders were these Japanese guys climbing hard north faces in the Alps, and they realized that there wasn't something suitable for that. And so they went and designed like a technical apparel and gear company. Then Outdoor Research comes to mind, and of course, Northwest Alpine. But what seems to be a really unique divergence, which sets Northwest Alpine apart, is that strong commitment to manufacturing domestically. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is important and sort of how that catalyst and that divergence came about that sort of pushed these other core brands into overseas manufacturing?
Yeah. So kind of before starting the brand, I'd gotten really, around 2008, I gotten really interested in, we had the start of the great financial crisis and all of that, and became really interested in economics and started doing a lot of like research on my own, just trying to figure out, understand more of what was happening. And, my educational background, I'd taken some economics courses, but I have a undergraduate degree in sociology, and then I did some graduate study in sociology also. So really, like, intellectually, I was just very interested in figuring out what was happening. And I kind of came to the conclusion through that, my reading and all that not having manufacturing in this country, it was pretty detrimental to, to most Americans, and that, you can't really have an economy where you just sell houses back and forth to each other. And, that's not like an actual creator of value in an economy. And so wanted to, part of the genesis was just wanting to start a company that supported that local manufacturing, and that kind of just started the whole journey in Portland. I was living in Portland at the time, and Portland's a big apparel town, so there's a lot of talent there as far as design, and there's some manufacturing that's left. So that was kind of like, some manufacturing infrastructure that's left. So that was kind of helpful in getting started.
Amazing. That makes a lot of sense, and it resonates a lot too, as a person who's kind of primarily focused my career and energy and efforts into the outdoors, but is very interested in these crises that we face. I've also taken a lot of self-directed effort into understanding them. And I think what I've kind of come to realize through my own experiences as an alpinist, like literally going to the edges of the earth and seeing these glaciers melting and ice fall and rock fall on a large, massive scale due to the catastrophe that is climate change, like it really kind of focuses in and shows you those problems in a very upfront way. And something that has troubled me is like, okay, we've known about climate change for the better part of 7 years, at least like human cause climate change for 70 years. Yet we've seemed virtually powerless to do anything about it. And when you kind of go upstream from all of that, it leads to the fact that we've got a system of economic relations that is predicated on perpetual growth, because there's an inherent profit motive that is tied directly to that. And so we produce goods and surplus value in order to facilitate capital accumulation instead of meeting human need. And that system, if we want to put a name to it, capitalism. And under the specific orientation right now, which is dictated the last 50 or so years of the economy, is neoliberalism. And I would love if you could kind of take and examine that a little bit and speak to it from the perspective of the outdoor industry and manufacturing, and maybe also describe how that ties into NAFTA and how that kind of created a bit of a shift.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a huge topic. But what comes to mind, I mean, first of all, is that, since the 90s and, really the like acceleration of globalization, we've had our it's transformed our economy to where 70% of our economy is consumer spending, right? And that in itself is a massive problem. And that's because specifically because we've decided that the powers that be, the economists and the think tanks and the politicians have decided that cheap goods are more of a priority than good jobs and whatever, because this idea is like, oh, you can just as long as we can buy stuff and it's inexpensive, then then people are gonna be okay or something. And clearly, like that, that has not been good for the vast majority of Americans. And I think that, sorry, I'm getting kind of lost here.
Yeah.
Maybe we break it down into like a smaller chunk. Where could I start?
So let's kind of back it up a little bit to globalization and how that creates a specific motive for companies to operate within. And I think that might be a good place, because ultimately, when we look at rising emissions, it comes from overproduction that's not oriented towards human need.
Yeah. So I think like the real acceleration of globalization in the 90s, it had been happening for a while, and it was really NAFTA and then GATT and China's induction into the WTO and most favored nation status and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, maybe I want to start over.
All good. So when I think about the outdoor industry in particular, you've got these companies which profess really progressive values, care about people and the climate, but underneath the hood of that all, what we've really got is a system of economic relations that dictates profit rate of profit increases like the most important thing, which is kind of inherently at odds with addressing human need and kind of the adapting to the worst effects of climate change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a massive contradiction between professed values and actual reality. It's so hard.
Let's break it down a little bit more and kind of take maybe like a material application that we can look at. I think a example that I've been studying recently is like a staple of outdoor kit that everybody uses, which is the Humble Sun hoodie. And if you look at different companies that produce a sun hoodie, they generally have a similar retail value, which you can get for around 75 or 80 bucks for this solid piece of kit. And I would love it if you could kind of explore how that retail price is almost like an acceptance of what the market will pay, yet there are huge discrepancies in what goes into manufacturing a sun hoodie if it's produced in Asia versus if it's produced like in one of your factories or your manufacturing partners here in the US. So what does that relationship look like?
I feel like it's, I mean, when you look at it, I feel like it's really just like chasing after higher margins, right? When you kind of sit there and do the math, oftentimes it on paper, it seems to be that, these large, outdoor companies are getting about like a 90% margin. Whereas, when you manufacture here, you're taking less, but also that 90% margin comes with a much higher cost to, other people, their home, everything else and the planet ultimately.
Yeah. So you're like, when you're producing things overseas, and I think everybody knows that, like, just because of the labor intensive nature of apparel manufacturing, these brands are always chasing the cheapest labor, basically. And, everybody knows that people in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or whatever, make way less than the US does, but their cost of living is a lot lower and everything. But I don't think that people quite understand how little those people are paid. The Sri Lankan garment worker minimum wage is around $74 a month. And their, living wage, I think, is about 3 times that. So when you think about it versus, trying to make a product in the US where garment worker wages are, now depending on where you are in the $20 to $25 an hour. And, we think about things in terms of like, when you're manufacturing something, part of what you're doing is going through the construction of the garment, and then you're figuring out how many minutes it takes to make and all that. So in like a sun hoodie, you probably have about 20 minutes of labor. It's fairly easy to put together and all that. So if you're paying someone $75 a month to make something, what we can break down the per hour labor rate of that. I can't remember. I think you had that. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, the calculation, I think it ends up being like around $1 per hour in some of these markets, like in Cambodia or Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And so to your point, if a sewer can put together like 5 sun hoodies in an hour, they're doing that labor for literally $1. But when you look at the potential retail revenue of those sun hoodies, it's exponentially higher.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's also, because none of the brands own their own factories, they all use contract manufacturers. And that, so in many ways allows them to be like, well, they're not our employees, they're, this. So, we don't necessarily have, say over how much they get paid, which is bullshit. Like, if you're a customer as big as, a Patagonia or a North Face, you're a very important customer, probably the most important customer to that factory. And so you definitely have say over how much workers get paid. But again, like it's this goal is to chase the cheapest labor possible. And so I guess, in the US we're paying, if you're being paid, if you're paying $23 an hour to your employee and you're the factory, think about that, like $23 an hour. So in 2.5 hours, you're paying your employee the equivalent of a month's salary in Cambodia or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh.
Plus benefits.
Yeah, plus benefits and 401k and workers' comp and all the regulations you have to follow, environmental stuff and everything you have to do. So, I think that's, one of the reasons that brands are chasing this cheap labor and also like skirting any of the environmental responsibilities that they have that they don't have to pay for. So you have like all these externalities that aren't being paid for also, which is another big problem.
Yeah, economic anthropologist Dr. Jason Hickel speaks to this quite a bit in his book, The Divide, Global Inequality and Its Solutions. And the point that you make about the externalities, like there's a specific cost to producing these garments, to production, an environmental cost, a human cost. And essentially by having this production overseas, we kind of sweep those costs under the rug a little bit, especially as consumers and people in the global north, because those create specific detrimental environmental effects as far as like the points of extraction that occur to pull out the raw materials, but also with the emissions associated with that production. And interestingly, the vast majority of humanity lives within a specific range, kind of based around the equator. And that's where most of the production of goods occurs overseas. And it's also the region most at risk of climate change. And so these people bear the least amount of responsibility to increasing emissions, and yet they are beholden with the greatest cost and the greatest detrimental effect to their own environments and their own livelihoods due to this. And it's a consideration that we don't really talk about a whole lot in the global north, and that these companies, as altruistically oriented as their branding and messaging might be, none of them speak to those type of externalities. And that's just one aspect of what Hickel calls a hidden transfer of value. And the other aspect we kind of touched on before that is this significant discrepancy between how much the people there are being paid to essentially execute the same labor task as how much a person is being paid in North America to produce the exact same good. And yet somehow Northwest Alpine can charge $78 for its sun hoodie, where a company like Cotopaxi, who manufactures in Asia, charges the same amount for their sun hoodie. And so when you look at the production costs discrepancy between the labor costs with production in Asia and the labor costs in the United States, that is a massive, massive discrepancy. And I think an important part to really call out here is the laundering of goodwill that occurs through this process, especially when you have a company that kind of organizes its branding and messaging around gear for good, or similar companies organize around 1% for the planet. And that is to say that they donate 1% of their revenue to altruistic organizations that are supposed to help climate or people in the global south. But when you look at that massive discrepancy between production costs, what it reveals is that there's a significant amount of revenue that is ultimately being laundered into corporate shareholders of the companies that produce in Asia.
I mean, it's pure corporate greed, like, that's driving all of this, right? Like, I like to think about it like this. So in any product that you're manufacturing, you have cost of goods sold, right? That's your total cost that it costs to make your product that you're going to sell. And generally that includes, labor and materials, that they're shipping and that sort of stuff in there as well. But what companies did when they offshore their production, they took that, that labor part of the cost of goods sold was what capital, the ownership of the company, shared with people, with American workers and everything. And as, American workers started to demand a more share of that, of the profits of their labor, and wanted more benefits and wanted unionization and wanted all that stuff, companies said, fuck that. Like, now we have these trade deals with, China and whatever, and they're willing to work for nothing basically, and they don't want unions and they don't need benefits and all that. So screw you guys. So we're going to just take your part of the cost of goods sold. We're going to shrink that by, a 40th or whatever. And we're going to give that to factories in China, and then good luck. And we're going to keep the rest of it for ourselves because that's a profit market. And I think that really, I don't think people think about it like that. Like, there were all these promises in the 90s that, we're going to offshore production, but it's going to create all these other opportunities and, better jobs and all that. But now you look, and our biggest employers are Walmart, Home Depot, Target, Amazon. And what are the people doing there? They're stocking the shelves with goods that are made in China, and they're being paid a lot less than they would if they were actually manufacturing.
Yeah, that's a huge truth right there.
I think if you go to like any of those towns, like, there's a real, I've been to Campbellsville, Kentucky, and there was a article in the year 2000. I think it was in Wired or another magazine. Really interesting because they talk about how Campbellsville had their major employer was either Hanes or Fruit of the Loom. I can't remember. I think it's Fruit of the Loom. They had a 5,000 person factory in Campbellsville. And they, in the 90s, they closed that down and moved it to Honduras, and, it decimated the town. And, this Wired article talked about how, Amazon was opening, I think, their 5th warehouse in the country in Campbellsville. And after that, and there was all this like, oh, it's going to be great. Like, you know, this new technology is going to enable these new jobs and all that sort of stuff. And Campbellsville hasn't recovered since then. You know, I think there was actually a New York Times article a few years ago that went and revisited Campbellsville also. And I mean, I think, and that just played out all across, you know,
just like
the Rust Belt, the South, and, you know, every town. It's still, you know, I think we're seeing, you know, the opiate crisis and deaths of despair, and, you know, the like life expectancy of men and everything, and all of that is affected by you know, the exodus of manufacturing.
Just a total decimation of the working class.
Yep. And, you know, and we can see it, like, now we talk about how income inequality is insane. You know, the worst it's been since the Gilded Age. And I think all of that is due to that.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. Another point to kind of tie it back into our conversation about that hidden transfer value and the good or altruistic motives. You've got all these outdoor companies that kind of launder the people's goodwill and their money through these programs like 1% for the planet or Gear for Good. And what that is like a 1% take from the sell of each product that the companies then divert into some sort of organization that they deem to be making an impact. But when we look at the math, we crunched some of these numbers earlier this afternoon, and the production cost to manufacture that sun hoodie in Asia somewhere around $7. And if they retail it direct to consumer for $75, that is a $68 revenue on that one piece of apparel. And if you take 1% of that $68, it's literally 68 cents. And so they're taking 68 cents and pushing it into some organization and calling that good. And
I have a big problem with, you know, there was when Patagonia announced their sale of the company to the planet or whatever, like, you know, and said, okay, we're going to donate whatever. Now, like, all of our profits that aren't reinvested into the company are going to be donated to these organizations, and our mission is to save the planet. And you look at that, and it's like, well, if your mission was actually to save the planet, you would just shut down, because you sell, you know, now probably $2 billion worth of apparel every year. And the damage that does to the planet is not going to be mitigated by, you know, donating $70 million in profits to some, it's just not, it's never going to be like,
to what are essentially like industrial aid complexes. And I think another great quote from Hickel is that the global South doesn't need our aid, which is an abysmal amount compared to the amount stolen through that hidden transfer value. I think his team did like some data calculations, and the amount of aid given to global South nations compared to the amount extracted is something like 32-1. And so they don't need our aid. They just need us to stop stealing from them, stealing their labor, stealing their resources. And when you look at these companies, particularly in the outdoor industry, they are laundering our money and our goodwill through that process of what is essentially theft through wealth drain from these companies. And then they're professing to save the people through these altruistically oriented programs that they make these paltry contributions to. And so that contradiction in and of itself, I think, is one of the strongest out there. And to your point about how if Patagonia wanted to save the planet, they would literally shut their production down because the amount of extraction and emission that is generated from their production is disproportionately contributing to the problems of environmental degradation and climate change. And that brings me to another point of conversation that I'd love to dig into, which is when you look at some of these tactics that are championed by both the Democratic administrations and think tanks, but also by organizations within the outdoor industry to address climate change through the financialization of efforts and technologies as a means to try and curb emissions. I'd love to get your perspective on the effectiveness, knowing that the vast majority of emissions do come from production as a creator of goods yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm highly skeptical of most of those organizations like 1% of the planet and fair trade and all of that. Like, none of those are addressing the actual problem, which is overproduction, and there's just too much shit. But the system is such that we can't, how as a profit-driven company do you even start to suggest to your shareholders, if you're a publicly traded or private equity owned company, that, hey, we actually need to start making less stuff, which means we're going to have less revenue, which means that, we're going against the fundamentals of global capitalism and what that's become. And until that can be reckoned with, nothing can change, really.
Yeah.
Before, and personally, I think like we're headed towards, global collapse and catastrophe because the system is not going to change. And like the little tiny things we're doing, like 1% for the planet, like whatever, is making no difference at all.
It's like the bare minimum.
Yeah, but it's making people feel good.
Yeah.
which is
even worse.
Yeah.
Because people can be like, oh, I bought this ethically produced good, then they can kind of wipe their hands and think, oh, I'm doing my part, but it just doesn't work like that. And I think a big part of that issue too is when you look at what has been deemed kind of like consumer activism. Ultimately, the ethically produced products that people are buying are they cost a lot more. And so through consumer activism, you're essentially relegating the ability to make change to a consumer. But because those products cost more money, it's only accessible to more affluent consumers. And when you've got an entire society that is kind of predicated on scarcity and many people are making it paycheck to paycheck. I think credit card debt is up to like a record 1.2 trillion right now. And like 50% of households are paying for basic needs like groceries and utilities with debt. And so the ability to affect change through consumer purchases is just completely disconnected from the reality of not only the working class, but from the need to actually reduce production overall.
I think the mindset of the consumer needs to change. You need to educate and share with consumers that the stuff problem, it is a problem, right? You don't need to have 5 different chinchillas to wear, you don't need to go buy the next Northwest Alpine black spider hoodie color that drops. Like you do not need that. I'm not being serious. It's not a marketing bullshit. It's not like you don't need this sweater.
Don't buy this jacket.
That's all bullshit. Like you don't. Like what I love seeing is our customers that they buy our stuff and they wear it for life. And they know that when they buy our stuff, we have, that we stand behind it because we repair it and we actually repair it. We're not sending it off to like some warehouse where it just collects up and, we forget about it, we're repairing it. Like I'm bringing stuff over to Lupe to go, have her fix it up at her house because she just, is amazing like that. So I think that there needs to be a mindset shift within, the consumer and, within, I guess the brands in our industry, as well, trying to show that, I think, I don't know where I was kind of fully going with that, but I think that there's a big a big shift that needs to happen with that. And I think we as marketing people need to actually try and show that, because, to me, it's important, when I show that, we've had a jacket that's lived a 15-year hard life, and comes back for repair and we repair it, that stuff like that's important because, our customers are setting a good example of how you don't discard, how you're actually wear it out until it's, done. I want less stuff. I just want better stuff that lasts. Right. So I think there's a part of that needs to happen for sure.
Yeah, that definitely resonates a lot. And I think that, there are these kind of cultural shifts that need to occur, but then those have to occur in conjunction with drastic economic changes.
Mm-hmm.
And
I had one more thought also on that.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry to cut you off. And I think a lot of that also, when we spend a pretty good amount of time, when we look at designing products and when we go to the drawing board, our goal is durability, right? Like we want things to last. We want it to last like we say it's going to last. So we're looking at materials that are going to do just that, take our belay jacket, for instance, like where most of the market is looking for lightweight and warm. We went after durability and, lightweight and warm and also weather resistant. So I think there's, being able to utilize, some of these materials to actually allow your, products to last that, life and last longer and also, create them in a way that makes them repairable, I think is really important. I think, there's a big mindset change that needs to happen with, within the industry because most of these companies are going after the cheapest materials possible just to meet the bottom line. Like that's lame.
Yeah, absolutely. With that kind of that cultural aspect of a theory for change, I think that it kind of leads really well into another aspect that we can kind of dovetail from this, which is how do we go about creating these economic shifts that can actually be effective in reducing overall production? Because right now we've got an economic system that's predicated on maintaining perpetual growth in order to create these profits. And when we look at the kind of historic precedents for affecting systemic change, that really has come down to one kind of bulwark against that, which is labor organizing. And when we have within the outdoor industry, I think one of the strongest aspects of labor organization that is currently occurring is with regards to the REI unionization efforts. And when you look at how REI has kind of been run in recent years, it's very much in line with that neoliberal directive to create as much profits as possible, which involves creating really precarious working conditions for their retail employees. And then on the manufacturing side, tying back into really chasing that bottom lowest cost of producing goods overseas. But you've also got this company that is very much in line with Patagonia or Cotopaxi from like a branding perspective, because it literally has co-op in the name. It has this perception of being a workers' co-op, which is one of the best ways to organize a company where there's democratic participation in how the production of that company is oriented. But in the case of REI, that's literally just like a form of kind of greenwashing, or essentially it's just a farce. And so you see this labor organization occurring for people to kind of reclaim some of that power in their workplace. But you've also got the company has hired the same law firm to bust their labor organization efforts, as the Trump administration is hiring to bust labor organizing efforts. And then to compound that a little bit, you've got the REI board supporting Trump's interior secretary pick, who is like oil and gas drilling baron. Doug Bergman is his name. And so it kind of brings us to another contradiction, and I'd love if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, REI is just such a massive influence on the industry. Obviously, we've talked about this quite a bit just amongst ourselves, like what such a massive percentage of outdoor business they have. They're literally like 40% a lot of the big brands' revenue, which is enormous. And think about it in terms of REI has not been doing well financially the last few years, and they've lost hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's a huge, just generally it's a huge risk for the industry. And I think ultimately, they've kind of done what Walmart did to most small towns and whatever, and that they have sort of eliminated the competition and smaller specialty retail and that sort of stuff. And I think they're just so massive that I haven't done too much research into their, I've read some articles about their labor issues and all that sort of stuff, but I don't know too much about it at this point.
I think if you want to make a change in regards of labor, I think that, making things here is kind of like the radical first step, because you actually have to care about your neighbor, right? Like that's really important. When the people that are, when like the stories of the people, and you personally know the people that are making the things that, you're buying and wearing, like that's really important. Like it's much harder to screw those people over and because like we forget, like when you're making stuff elsewhere, you forget that those people even exist. Like those stories don't matter, right? Like those people don't matter. Like, yeah, I don't know.
I think like the closer when you're making things here, you're getting closer to the true cost of what something actually makes, cost to make actually. And I think that's one of the big problems with overproduction is that, well, because labor is so cheap, because it makes materials cheaper, it makes everything cheaper, and it allows us to produce way more product than we could if we were actually paying a fair wage. If we were actually for instance, our Sun hoodie, the fabric is milled in Los Angeles, in downtown Los Angeles. California has the most stringent environmental regulations in the entire planet, and these guys are able to, it's a huge mill, probably the biggest on the West Coast, and they're able to produce fabric that we use that's sold at a competitive price, and still they reclaim all their water in their dye house. They do, they follow everything. Like you can't be like a massive polluter and be in downtown Los Angeles. Like it's not possible. So the closer we get to like being able to, to following like the regulations that our country has and all that sort of stuff, like we're paying for that, yes, but we're actually paying, closer to the true cost, what it costs to make these products. And I think that, until that becomes like the widespread norm, like nothing is going to change. And I don't see that happening because, who's benefited the most from offshoring and that sort of stuff. And it's been Wall Street, business owners, and not 99% of the country.
Absolutely. And you raise such strong points there, which kind of brings me to the next topic I'd like to get into, which is a theory of change. And I think in a lot of ways, Northwest Alpine is representative of that direction in the way that you're organizing your production and the way that you are creating products that are built to last, and also the way that you utilize your brand as a agitator, and as through kind of your type of communications, you agitate the industry and you hold it accountable, which is absolutely necessary, and nobody else is doing that in the way that you guys are. And so I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more about how Northwest Alpine kind of organizes your production, how the company like HQ is sort of organized, and what sort of like system of arrangement that is. What does life look like for you guys working at Northwest Alpine? Like what's your quality of life like?
You're pretty much looking at the HQ right now.
This is the HQ.
So yeah, I mean, we kind of in this like restarting phase. It's been interesting for me because we went from like our manufacturing company was pretty big. You know, we had millions of dollars in revenue, we paid millions of dollars of wages. We had 75 employees at the max. And after having to shut that down, which was a major bummer, but we you know, we kind of like restarting from the ground up. And so we're using, you know, initially when we started in 2010, we used contract manufacturers. So small factories, mostly around Portland. And then through my time in the industry, you know, working in manufacturing, I met a lot of other factories. So I know, you know, the good quality factories that treat their workers well, and you know, all the things that we want for people. So that was kind of interesting, transitioning our production from doing it ourselves to then working with contractors. So we have two main factories that we work with. One is in Los Angeles and then one is in Baltimore. So what we try and do, like I was mentioning, our Sunhitty fabric is milled in downtown LA. And it's milled about 5 miles away from where the cut and sew is. So once they get the fabric done, then it's just trucked over there and goes into production. And then so we try and keep the fabrics that are made in LA, you know, actually doing the cut and sew in LA. And then in Baltimore, you know, we get a lot of our fabrics from Polartec and a couple other companies that are based in Tennessee and North Carolina. So the East Coast fabrics all go up to Baltimore to be cut and sewn. So we're just trying to keep transportation tight, keep emissions down and keep costs down and all that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And to touch on quality of life and, you know, like what HQ and daily life is, it's simple. Like, you know, we moved into this space last October, September, on a non-existent, like $0 budget, essentially, of, you know, we just needed to bring our shipping and fulfilling back in house. So
yeah, I guess sorry to interrupt, but that's the other thing that you should know is that we're totally self-funded, and we always have been. So we've never had like investors. We've never had piles of cash. Everything, everything we do has to be profitable and self-supported and all of that. So when he says zero budget, we literally, I think we outfitted the space on what are we up to?
I think we're like $1,000.
$1,000, including like racking that you can see through there. Yeah. So everything like Facebook Marketplace, he's like a master of Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
And so everything like reclaimed, or, you know, try not to buy anything new. And I mean, part of that is because we don't have any money to do it. And part of that is just because that's our ethos. And
yeah,
I think generally, like, you know, personally, like, I'm not a big consumer of stuff. Like
Bill's driving like an 03 Golf with 285,000 miles on it, like, and wearing Danners that have holes in them. Like, he will he will use something until it dies. And I think like that's how we run Northwest Alpine.
And that's what we want everybody to do. I know, like, it's kind of hard in a world where, you know, you got to buy the newest shit. Like, to be like, no, you really only need like 3 pairs of pants and then wear them until they get holes in them. Then repair them. If you can't repair them, then you can, you know, do what you're going to do with them and then buy a new pair. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I had a good conversation with Kirby Bedsall, who's the GM. Do you know Chris King Components? They're a bike company.
Yeah.
And they're very similar in their, you know, how they view the world as we are, and Kirby definitely is. But I think, talking to him, it's like, it just, you can profess to have these values like a Patagonia or whatever, but then look at how the ownership acts and what they do, and then, tell me if they're actually living their values or not. And
Absolutely.
that's what we're trying to do here is actually be authentic to what we say we believe in and all that.
And I think to kind of categorize those values a little bit, y'all are producing a product that fulfills a need and serves a strong purpose.
Yep.
It's crafted and created in a way that is going to be endurable and repairable. And so it adheres to that long product lifespan that ultimately reduces not just consumption, but to think about it from the big picture, from a systems perspective, it reduces the amount of production that's required. And then to address what y'all are doing, like at HQ, you're producing to a degree that satisfies your material needs for living and sustaining your life in a way that is meaningful and characterized by what you value, like obviously spending time outside and kind of having a prioritization of actually increasing quality of life, because those are the things that are important. And so you've essentially oriented your company in a way that is structured to champion those values instead of championing maximum profit accumulation.
Absolutely. And we want, like, my goal has always been to make product here and to sell it at, prices that are comparable to products that are made overseas. And we can do it. It's actually getting easier to do that because the brands keep raising prices, and, growing their margins, where we're looking at it like, okay, we don't need or want 80-90% margins for ourselves. And, I keep thinking about this conversation with Kirby Bedsall from Chris King, because he's like, yeah, Chris would call that profiteering. And that's exactly what it is. It's not a value to the customer. If you're like pushing wages down, your wages that are being paid to make your product overseas, it's pure profiteering and greed. And like, I don't think that, like, to me, like, I believe in capitalism, I believe in markets and all of that. But I also believe that businesses have a responsibility to their employees and to the customer and to their vendors to do the right thing, and to actually do the right thing, not just say you're going to do the right thing. So
it's kind of rooted in an idea of enoughism, like what is enough and how can we produce to meet whatever that need is determined. And I think that you guys as the company stakeholders get to sort of determine that and ensure that it aligns with your values, and then it has a cascading effect that creates positive impact at every level as you drop down the supply chain.
100%.
That's the idea. Hopefully. But it seems to be resonating with people. Like, we're growing in a way that I think is sustainable and good. And, people ask about, what are your revenue goals and all that sort of stuff. And we don't really have any. It's, we need to be able to make a living and be comfortable. And I think that, whatever, I believe in being compensated for your work as a business owner and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not, obviously against that or anything, but yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
Yeah, I think that it can, it's an incredibly inspirational thing what y'all are doing, and in some degrees it's aspirational. How how do you see Northwest Alpine and the work that you're doing functioning as kind of a lighthouse to challenge the rest of the outdoor industry to operate in a way that is more aligned with their professed values?
Oh man, this is a good question. I'll take this one for a second. I'll let Bill fill in. I think right now more than ever, like I think, as someone that's, been here almost a year now, I think that I see Northwest Alpine as this lighthouse because people are coming to us from other companies knowing that we have the knowledge to help them reshore and bring their manufacturing closer. And we have the ability and the capability, and Bill has the knowledge and tools to help them do that. I think that if we can show and be that thought leader and be that leader for change within the industry, I think it'll resonate, and it is resonating. It's resonating with other, leaders. It's resonating, with our customers. It's resonating with younger generations. I think those things are really important. It's showing that people care finally.
I mean, I think we're going to get to a point where it has to happen. I mean, we're already there, right? Like, we can't continue on this path with emissions where they are with, it's going to get too expensive to produce overseas, which, you can put the screws on labor, as hard as you can. But as we continue down this path, the U.S. is stepping back from its kind of global hegemonic military role that has really existed in order to keep trade lanes open, to keep the global trade routes going and all that. So there's going to be more piracy. Insurance costs for shipping are going to go through the roof. You see it now, like the Houthis in Yemen lobbing missiles at, essentially closing the Suez Canal. As like climate change accelerates, there's going to be more, climate related disasters that are going to affect the ability to ship things. Massive flooding in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and all of that is going to compound, where it's going to be, I think, become, not to mention like other geopolitical instability, like wars and everything that seemed to be increasing. At some point it's going to be untenable to make things overseas, and it's going to force change, because I think that's the only way it's going to, right, is if the costs become too great. And I think we're going to see that in the next few years. And it seems like, as the current political situation, things are accelerating and all that. And part of like my whole, reason for being interested in this and concerned about it is that I think it's also a preparedness thing for our society. We saw it firsthand during the PPE crisis, during COVID, when China shut off exports overnight. And, we responded, and the entire textile industry responded and made millions and millions and millions of pieces of PPE. And we did ourselves as well, and felt like we were doing something to, do good for our communities and everything. But that situation is actually worse than it was. So like our factory shut down because of that. And a lot of other factories also shut down because of that. And it's almost like it's inevitable that we have another situation where supply chains are fucked and we can't get the things that we need for our society to run. And from 2020, when that became apparent that this was going to be a big problem, we should have been working on figuring out how to actually, I know the Biden administration worked on chips, but it's like what is a chip going to do when your doctor is wearing a trash bag or whatever? So, I think that's a big problem that is going to have to be addressed. And again, I think it's going to be a forced addressing of the problem, because it's not being done voluntarily, and it's probably not going to be.
A big reckoning day for a lot of people.
Yeah, that brings another kind of topic or point to attention. When a significant societal need arose, the productive capacities in the US that were more democratically managed were able to shift their output to satisfy a human need with the production of PPE, with the production of like alcohol-based hand sanitizers. I know some distilleries shifted their production to that. Could you talk a little bit about what that process or that integration of like economic democracy could look like in the US and how that could be a positive thing?
Oh man. I mean, I think there was a big, let's see, let me think about this for a minute.
I don't know. Repeat the question one more time. Give me one more. Yeah, because I know I feel like I have an answer for that.
So how things are typically organized, you've got shareholder demands and profit goals. And so production is typically organized to create whatever the market is going to deem most profitable, whether society needs the production of those goods or not. However, those needs don't always align, or those production outputs don't always align with human or societal needs, as we saw in when the pandemic kind of arose. And so there was this ability for production in the United States to shift to meet kind of those needs through the creation of PPE. And that's just kind of emblematic of what that could look like on a broader scale. When you think about something that I really stands out to me, another paper that Hickel's team worked on, title something like Creating Better Lives for All, but the human productive capacity can meet all of human need to create dignified lives, which is shelter, food, healthcare, education, transportation, internet and connective devices, refrigeration, literally everything people need to have good quality of life. That can be met with 30% of current productive capacity. However, those needs are not met because we have production organized around capital accumulation instead of meeting human need. But in that example, there was a strong human need that came about with the requirements for PPE, and small domestic manufacturers were able to kind of pivot to address that. And obviously there were some market-driven forces behind that, but it did address a societal need. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
I mean, I think so. Like I said before, I'm a big believer in markets and in actual capitalism, and I think that was a function of that. Like we saw, you know, the PPE industry was extraordinarily heavily subsidized in China. Like basically they said, we want to own this industry. And so, you know, they gave free land for factories, and, you know, the entire thing was subsidized so that they could sell a disposable mask for a penny or a half a penny that has, you know, that trying to make it in the US had 6 cents just of material in it, right? So, you know, that subsidization allowed them to dump PPE products on our market. And it's not like the fault of, you know, of the Chinese companies. It's American firms that, you know, or the big ones like McKesson and Medline and whatever that that were really profiting from that. So I see the PPE, all of a sudden there was, you know, a massive market need for those products, and you know, it was responded to, and that ended up benefiting, you know, a ton of workers in the US, because now there was, you know, this massive need for production that wasn't there before. And I feel like that's how it could be with everything, right? Given the right scenario. But I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, well, I've been listening to like the 90-pound rucksack podcast, which kind of, talks about the 10th Mountain Division and how they've kind of played a huge role into the outdoor industry's, creation within the, the US. But I think it was like one of the last episodes they're talking about, like World War II, we go into war and then like overnight, there's all this demand for manufacturing. And not by choice, but by the need and demand of the government. All these, everyone had to shift their focus into making things, for the war effort, right? So, they were talking about nylon not being able to, be used for tents because the nylon was needed, for parachutes and other stuff. I think that if you can't shift and pivot like that, you're going to get forgotten and you're going to be kind of punished by the government because of the needs of society, right? Like that was a need of society at the time, was to fuel and fund the war effort, through manufacturing. And I think, if things like, another COVID or war happen, like that's inevitably going to happen. Like we're going to have to pivot. And with how little manufacturing capability we have now, it's inevitable that it's all going to shift just like that.
Yeah. And there's kind of to your points earlier, such little productive industrial capacity in the United States. And so it seems like positive thing all around would be to continue reshoring and creating those jobs in the United States with that manufacturing base being built up.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the goal. I think that like my previous point about preparedness, just we don't have the production capacity like we did during World War II to be able to shift our our factories to start making arms, or whether that's good or bad doesn't matter. Like it's just not happening at this point. So yeah, I mean, I think all around, like there has to be if we're looking at like overproduction as like the big problem, there has to be a limit on production, right? And I think that limit has to come from the true cost of making things. And I think the only way you can do that is to make things close to home where where you have some semblance of control over that. Like companies trying to make sustainability plans for their factories that are 9,000 miles away is silly. When you're making things here, it's like, well, I can't go dump the excess dye from this dye house into the river in Ohio and not get in big trouble for doing that. So again, I think it's just keeping things close to home and dealing with the consequences here instead of pushing it off to other places.
Yeah, ultimately it creates accountability, and that in and of itself, those regulations can kind of function to hold you true to that. For any founders who might be listening, or people who are interested in kind of learning more about Northwest Alpine and your vision, or I know that you've closed down your own in-house production facilities, but it sounds like you've got people and entities kind of coming to you from like a consulting perspective. If anybody's interested in learning more about that stuff or reaching out, what's the best way to get in touch with y'all, or if that's something you're open to?
Yeah, no, definitely. You can just shoot me an email, bill@nwalpine.com, and I'll try and respond in a timely manner. Or you can follow us on Instagram.
I responded to DMs pretty quick.
He's probably faster than me.
Caleb's on it. I can attest to that.
I gotta be on it. I think, I mean, like Bill's pretty invested, and I think he's got a pretty big goal, of revitalizing, U.S. manufacturing. That's been, like the last quarter or so has been a big focus of ours. We've taken, especially with current events and whatnot, try to help others, with that. It's also been scary seeing, factories closing because they don't have the work, though there's clearly a demand. Like, I just don't know why people aren't shifting to it. So, selfishly, we want to see those factories, not selfishly, but, like, we want to see those factories thriving. And again, a rising tide lifts all ships.
There's been a lot of, for all the talk of reshoring, with the tariffs and all that sort of stuff, it hasn't been happening. So I think ever since, we're kind of, especially in the outdoor industry, you had boom times during COVID, and then the last few years have been a shit show. And there's been a ton of inventory because, companies weren't producing based on comps from COVID sales, which were never going to happen again. And so, a ton of inventory, discounts, everything's discounted 40 or 50% off all year. It's caused big problems. So, like, a lot of the factories here are still pretty slow and need work and everything. So that's why I'm trying to talk to people like, if you want to get into making stuff here, right now is the time to do it, because factories have capacity and
minimums are low.
They really want work. Minimums are good. Like, they just want to be busy. So we've had some people take us up on it. And I mean, I think that, like, in the long term, I'm really, positive and excited about U.S. manufacturing. I think, it has a long way to go to grow, and it's just going to be better for our country and better for the planet and better for the people, and the more we do it. So
absolutely. Well, is there anything else y'all would like to share before we wrap this up?
Oh, stoked that we got a chat.
Finally got to talk.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, this was totally awesome and super informative and really inspiring what you guys are doing. And I look forward to kind of following along and seeing that mission grow and come to life. And hopefully, as a lighthouse, you bring other people into your harbor and kind of show them the way, because something's got to change.
Yep, a rising tide lifts all ships, and that's really our goal. We just want to see this all thriving and flourishing at the end of the day.
Yeah, so we can go do more alpine climbs.
Amen. 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 When you come to Oregon, let's go do something fun.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I'm about due for a trip.
Hey, let's go.
Let's do it.
Oh man, stoked.